everyone. Thank you for joining us today on TPM Talks from Top Market Attorneys. This is a panel discussion where a diverse team of industry professionals explore different events, latest news, and sort of give their perspective and advice and tips on this range of topics, just to keep us informed. And this is another avenue for us to learn, about new interests that we might not even have explored previously. Before we start, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. And I want to encourage our viewers to please like our videos, comment below, and just subscribe to our channel so that you get notified of new videos once we have them out. Just thank you all again. My name is Oduwole from Top Market Attorneys, and with me here today, I have Mr. Akin Reju, one of our partners at Top Market Attorneys, and he's popularly known as Mr. Akin. Before I get him to introduce himself a little bit further, I'm just gonna introduce our topic. We are focusing on one of his areas of practice today. It's real estate, and I'm sure our viewers will be very interested in this topic because we're going to look at what could possibly go wrong in acquiring a residential real estate as an individual. So before we start though, I'm going to have Mr. Reju introduce himself and then tell us a little bit about the topic we're going to be viewing today.
Okay, thank you and good day everyone. And thank you for having me today. We are going to be looking at real estate. Like they said, my name is Akin Reju. I am the senior partner in charge of business law, which includes corporate law, includes business, immigration, as well as real estate. So the topic we'll be looking about at today has to do with what could go wrong in a real estate a transaction. For a lot of people, real estate is one very key investment in our lifetime, in our social life and economic life. That we've been told from research is that an average person will spend about 40 to 45% of our income on either owning a house or paying a mortgage or even renting. So I think the topic is very rich, and we are really going to learn from it today. Thank you once again, Anne.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction, Mr. Reju. And as he said, a number of us are definitely, trying to take that step into owning a real estate, owning something, a condo, a townhouse, anything real estate oriented. Now, before we start, can you please just tell us a little bit about going into real estate? Who are some of the people that we interact with when we decide to go into this option?
Okay, thank you. I can definitely talk about that. Now, you have to bear in mind that a real estate could be either commercial or residential. But maybe for simplicity's sake, today I will just talk about real estate. I will talk about residential portion of it. So for someone who's going to real estate, basically you have to walk through the agents. I'm sure you've seen a lot of them around. They advertise the houses and they do a lot of that. So they are called agents, but they are also licensed in Ontario, for example, as real estate brokers. So that is one very key party. Then of course you have you are going to have the lawyers. Definitely you have the lawyers, and then of course you will also have the seller, that is the person who's going to sell the property to you. Of course, very importantly, the money people, you're going to have the bankers.
Yes.
Without the bankers, you can't even get that property, right? And then very, very importantly, you will also have the state. That is, for example, in Ontario, for example, the registry for concluding a transaction is located in the ministry. So you also have the Ontario government being a party to a real estate transaction.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask a little bit, as a lawyer yourself, what role do you play in this real estate transaction that people want to go into?
Okay, good. So I was actually saving that for the last. Now, for the lawyers, generally, we are the people who put everything together, right?
Mm,
So without us in this real estate transaction, we can't even close, right? But well, that's just on the lighter mode there.
mm,
But basically, what we do is to represent basically the buyers as well as the banks in most
okay.
cases, in order to close this transaction. So we know what the law says about how the transaction, has to be properly closed.
Mhm,
We liaise with both the agent, we liaise with the seller, the buyer, as well as the banks, in order to put all the documentation together, and we assist the buyer to actually pay the proceeds to the seller at the end of the day. But I know we'll still get there. So let me just keep my powders dry.
all right. So as we all know, a lot of work goes into real estate. And today, because there's so much details we could explore, we're just going to focus on things that could go wrong on our end when we decide to buy a piece of real estate. So if you're looking at buying a condo, this is an opportunity for you to just sort of listen to some of the risk associated with going into buying a condo, a townhouse, or just, detached building itself. Every day we learn something new. You never know. You might hear something here that you haven't heard yet. So please, sir, can you tell us to start off with, what are the things people need to get ready in order to start the transaction itself?
Okay, good. So now we're just looking at our residential, and for someone who wants to purchase. Now, one of the first things you need to be sure that you have correct is your credit history.
Mm,
In this transaction, credit is like gold. It's so important.
that is
Actually,
true.
without a good credit history, you can't even be talking about getting real estate at all. But
Mm,
I would also like to say that for anyone who wants to go into a purchase, you must have a job. Or okay, let me say you must have an income, a steady
mm,
flow of income. I know that a lot of people are business people, and your income is not regular. Maybe in about 3 months you may not make anything. Then in 1 month you make the kind of money that can actually buy the property, just once. But the ideal kind of flow, the ideal kind of income flow that the bank wants to see is that you have a regular income. Actually, the
mm,
bank prefers that you have just enough income, probably to pay your mortgage and for some of your expenses, than for you to be having erratic kind of supply of funds. So I would say that is the second thing you need to have. And number three, of course, is that you need to look for the property now. Okay,
mm,
so you have a good credit history, and then you have a steady flow of income, and then of course you need to get a property. And this
mhm,
is where the brokers come in, because a lot of it, because it's a regulated industry, it's a regulated market. You need the brokers to be able to access that market.
mm,
Of course, a lot of people, when they start off, they will probably be looking at the adverts. For example, in Ontario, they have a real estate board, which
mm,
controls how they advertise and all that. And you of course go into that portal where you can simply look at the properties and all that. So
mhm,
so so you need to find that property, and in order to do that, you have to use the brokers.
mm,
A lot of people will try and get maybe a mortgage broker, but if you have a bank, right? If you have a bank, you can go to their mortgage department and actually tell them that, oh, you're preparing to buy a property, and they will actually guide you through how you can access the funds. So
mm,
I've said it there. You need a good credit history. You need a job that guarantees a steady flow. You need the brokers. You need to get the property, and then you need to prepare for the mortgage. Now, the one
mhm,
final thing about preparing for the mortgage is that you need to approach the bank and get something they call a pre-approval. A
mm,
pre-approval. For a lot of transactions, the seller, or maybe for example, if it's a condo or you are buying a new home, they will expect you to provide what they call a pre-approval. So the pre-approval is a document that is issued by the bank, and this tells you, okay, this is how much you're actually qualified for. So the bank has its own way of gauging how much your income is and how much can go towards a mortgage. I
Okay.
hope I've provided the answer you
Yeah,
want.
yeah, yes, sir. That was really, really, really helpful, Mr. Reju. Just a hypothetical question for you here. Since we're talking about what could go wrong, what are the things that can possibly, I know you've mentioned credit history here.
Okay.
And I'm assuming you need to have that good credit history to even have the bank look at your application. So that's definitely one thing that I think would go wrong if you don't have that. The pre-approval, which is the first step, is
Yeah.
definitely going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's hard, as especially as a young person myself. I can definitely attest to credit score. You started looking at that at a very young age,
Yeah.
and thankfully now the bank allows you to look at your credit score from your account, which is good. um I know when I moved here from Nigeria initially, I had no clue what a credit score was or what a credit history was. So um it was looking into things like real estate that opened my eyes into a credit score. All right. So sir, we would like to ask you what the next step would be. So once you get this pre-approval from the bank, what is the next step that you need to take? And what are the things you need to watch out for in order for it not to go wrong?
Okay. Okay. Great. So once you get your pre-approval, a lot of the time I should mention that you may probably only need a pre-approval when you're buying a new home, right?
Mhm.
Because it's a different
Mhm.
transaction from when you are buying what we call a resale home. A new
Oh.
home is, for example, you find these builders, all over the place, and they say, open now, register, and all that. And then you're very interested in living in a particular area, and then you go into their office. They have these small cubicle kind of offices, and then you go in there and tell them, oh, I want to buy a home, and all that. So they'll give you the plans, and then you decide, okay, this is the kind of home that I want, right? So the
Mm.
next stage for you is to fill out your application. Now, when you fill out the application, usually they ask you for a deposit. Now you remember we're talking about a new home, so they give you
Yes.
a deposit. I mean, you give them a deposit along with your application. So by the time they look at that, okay, they sign the documentation, and then you pay an amount. They'll tell
Mhm.
you how much you need to pay in order to have a deposit for the property. Usually, a lot of them go for like 20%. So let's say the properties are advertised for about 720,000. So they look for 20%. That's like 72 into, that's about 144,000. So that's what you should be looking for. For some builders, they may say, okay, 10%. And that gives you an opportunity to only pay about 72. Now, what they do is that for the very first time, when you submit the application, they ask you to submit it with a bank draft or a check for a particular amount, which must clear. So when you look at the agreement will actually say this is how you have to pay the deposit. Now,
Okay.
remember that deposit is what gives you what we call a consideration to be able to buy that property. So it is after that, when you want to close, that the bank will say, okay, we want to see your pre-approval. You must have been pre-approved. And this is where the pre-approval is very important. So if you go to your bank and then you tell them, oh, I want to buy a property, then they will look at your income, and then they do their own calculation in their underwriting. They come back to you and say, well, you are only qualified for 600,000. So let's say you are qualified for only 600,000, and the property is what, about 720. Then straight there, of course, that the bank is not going to give you the 600,000, because they
Mhm.
are going to say, oh, you're supposed to contribute an amount to it. So most of the time, if you don't have enough a pre-approval arrangement with the bank, what you can actually do is to get a co-signer. But I
Oh.
always advise my clients, especially those who are buying a property for the first time, that the lower the amount of the initial expense you have to do on the house is, the better for you. So if you get a pre-approval for about 600,000 from the bank, my advice to you will always be, ensure that the property you're looking at is just like 600, 650,000.
Mhm.
Okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much for that addition. So you mentioned just now that you can get a co-signer on to sign off on the real estate purchase you want to do. Who are some of the people that can possibly co-sign for an individual that decides to go into real estate?
Okay, that's another very good one. Okay, so now I mentioned a co-signer when I was talking about someone who wants to buy and he doesn't have either the required deposit or he can't close and something like that. So the bank allows you to bring a co-signer. So a co-signer can be anyone. For some banks, they may give some conditions and say you must provide evidence of relationship to a co-signer. But for most of the time, the bank really doesn't care about who your co-signer is. But a co-signer is someone who is who the bank can vet and consider to be someone who can contribute to the proceeds of your mortgage. So another very hypothetical example: the property is 500,000. The only mortgage you can get from your bank is about 450,000. So you need a co-signer for how much? For 50,000. Now, all you need to do is to submit the name, address, and the application form to that co-signer, who will actually sign off as someone who is also investing in that same property. Now, between you and the co-signer, it means you will probably have like maybe 90% of the portion of that property, and the co-signer theoretically owns like 10%, depending on the amount that the person is signing for. Remember, because the person is a co-signer, it means that on the day of closing, that person must provide the funds, that corresponds to the portion of the property that he has signed for. So instead of you being the only owner of that property, now you have two people who are owners. But what a lot of people do is that if you have a co-signer to close, by the time you close, if you happen to come into some funds, you can actually buy back whatever portion the co-signer has, and of course that's another kind of transaction. Which is why I said in the beginning that I always advise people who are going to purchase for the very first time to buy only what they can afford, because the real estate market here in Canada is so wonderful that if you buy a property today, in about a year or two's time, the equity in that property will probably be enough for you to upgrade. We call it upgrade. So instead of you looking at that as semi-detached property, or the detached property that is on a 60 lot, and you want to own it for your starter house, I would rather advise that the very first property you buy, make sure that you can afford that property. Start small, grow big.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Reju. So subscribers, viewers, listen to what he's saying. Don't be afraid to go for a condo. There's nothing bad in going for a condo first. All right. So you've hypothetically, let's say I had a friend, or I have a friend who is willing to co-sign for me. And let's say last minute something comes up, the person cannot co-sign for me. Is this detrimental to me closing on that house?
Okay, definitely it will be. Now, so the assumption is that the assumption from the bank or the seller, if for example it's a builder, or even if it's a resale property, is that you have enough funds to close on that particular day. Most of the time, I see people only use co-signers when they are buying new properties. So, I mean, just for illustration's sake, let's say that you're buying a resale house, right? And you don't have enough money, and you got somebody to actually give you money. Now, the bank doesn't like that. The bank doesn't really want to encourage that, and the reason is the bank feels that you are living above your means. They would rather you purchase that property completely alone. Now, but let's come back to the issue of the co-signer. So if your co-signer withdraws, that is a problem. And that is one of the things that could actually go wrong in a real estate transaction. There are many of them, but that is something that if the co-signer suddenly develops maybe cold feet, maybe the co-signer is a friend, and maybe before the day of closing, he or she tells his or her spouse or a relative, and he says, "Oh, you better don't put yourself in trouble with anyone. Why are you co-signing?" And the person calls you and say, I'm sorry, you know what? I won't be able to continue with this transaction. That is actually a problem, because at that stage, you most probably will have deposited some amount, maybe 10% of the value of the property, and the agreement you have signed says that if you don't close on the closing day, your deposit is liable to being forfeited. And that
Oh,
is why you
wow.
see real estate. Yeah, that's why you see real estate at sometimes to be it's an adrenaline pumping transaction. So
That is true.
exactly. So that's why you see a lot of the time the buyers, and you see the lawyers, and you see everyone. They want to do everything to ensure that transaction closes on that day.
Mm,
Otherwise, the purchaser is liable to losing the deposit. And you remember the deposit is either 10% or 20%. And that is a lot of money. So yes, if there's a problem with your co-signer on the closing day, that is a big problem.
mm. Wow. Thank you so much, Mr. Reju, for this wonderful session. Not just learning about how proper planning is very essential to any real estate transaction. Making sure your credit history is intact, making sure you work with the right brokers, lawyers, have all your documents, make sure even your job is secure
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the
yeah,
people you want to assist you, are strong till the very end. But it's very, my heart is kind of pounding just hearing that I could lose the 10% I put forward if
yeah.
something
But
goes wrong.
but but if I may quickly say this,
Mhm.
this is why proper planning is very key for a
Mm,
real estate transaction.
that is
I know
true.
a lot of people go into a real estate transaction because of what I can call maybe peer influence, right? Oh, my
Mm,
friend bought a condo, or my friend bought a semi-detached, or my friend bought this kind of. So I just want to buy it myself. Now, a proper planning in place of getting your job, just like you said, ensuring that your credit history remains like that. If you have a lot of credit cards, you need to try and pay them down. The more of your credit cards that you pay down, the better your scores look at the end of the day.
mm,
And now, because a lot of banks, like you rightly said, are allowing you to actually see your credit score, you can actually monitor it all the time, but ensure that either before the end of the month or before or when the credit card company says you should pay up, ensure that you pay up everything, even if you're going to go back the next cycle and take that money. But let me tell you, it is important for you to ensure that your credit score remains very high, because the
mm,
higher it is, the lower the rate of interest that the bank is going to charge you on that mortgage, and most probably the smaller the mortgage that you're going to pay. So it's all driven by your credit score. Of course, the other important thing that you want to talk about there is that just before your transaction, ensure you don't make a huge credit card purchases, because
mm,
it's a negative signal to the bank that you are either living above your means or you cannot control your expenses. So some of
mm,
these things are very, very important. And if the bank discovers that you've made a very huge purchase just days before your transaction, it is actually a red flag. I've seen
wow.
banks who actually turn down an application at the last minute, because when they go back to check your credit score, they find that you have now incurred a huge debt just days before your closing. I've seen some
Wow.
banks withdraw because of that. They will just say
Wow.
underwriting is not approving that transaction, and
Mm,
that's something that could go wrong.
wow. All right. I just want to thank you again, Mr. Reju, for joining us in this episode on what could go wrong in a residential real estate purchase. It's been really wonderful. Your participation has been really helpful, and I'm sure our viewers have learned a lot this morning. And definitely, I have. I'm going to be taking notes of some of the things we discussed this morning, just so that when I'm ready, I can check those off my list. Thank you so much, everybody, again for joining in with us today. And like I said before, subscribe to our channel. We're on YouTube. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook to just get you updated on when our next episode is coming out. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day, guys.
Thank you.